Okay, I think we can get kick started. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the May 22nd instance of the Bytecode Alliance SIG Documentation Meeting. We don't have any uh, agenda items on our agenda right now, but Calvin is going to start us off with a discussion around component registries in the component documentation.
Cool. So a couple things to discuss here. So one, I posted in the chat. Danny was working on a PR to update the component model docs book with showcasing like how you can use it, the tooling with registries, since a lot of the component model, the cargo component and WAC have WARG registry integration. Unfortunately, the only way to demonstrate some of that stuff is to point it to an actual WARG registry. And wa.dev service that we're running is the only active WARG registry. And Till mentioned that the steering committee discussed some things around this, that they were going to issue some guidance around these things. And effectively, I chatted with him a little bit on Zillow after he posted that their thinking is as it totally makes sense, the BA should be as vendor neutral as possible, right? And anything related to BA projects should do that. The problem is that there needs to be some vendor until the BA runs their own registry. And the only acceptable vendor neutral option right now is GitHub container registries, since the BA already uses GitHub a lot. And GitHub container registries obviously is not a WARG registry, it's an OCI one. And I could talk about some tooling updates where OCI is actually going to be an option soon. But the bottom line is that that PR can't be merged with references to anything that's hosted in basically not on GitHub container registry, effectively, for the time being. It's possible the TSC may issue different guidance in the future or whatever, but that's basically the bottom line for right now. Regarding like so Lan Martin and I have been working on basically a new project we're calling WASM PKG tools, and it's going to have a CLI called Whackage, WKG. I know. And it's going to be able to talk to OCI and WARG registries for fetching and publishing, as well as other URLs and local file paths. And that tool will be integrated into Cargo Component and WAC and any of the other tools, so we can point the thing wherever we want. When that happens, then we can update this PR, and it is worth reviewing this PR still, because the changes are going to be pretty minor, like when it's just like changing where you're fetching the resources sort of problem. So it's still worthwhile iterating on the PR, maybe keeping it active, because when it changes, it's just switching URLs effectively, and a little bit of configuration. So but it is worth noting another feature that is already live in some of these tooling pieces, including on the WARG integration, is that you can point it to a domain that is not a registry, but hosts a .well-known JSON file at a path. And in that JSON file, it provides a URL to where the registry actually is and what type of registry it is. So right now, it's configured to work with OCI and WARG. And so, for instance, there's a .well-known configuration hosted currently on the bytecodealliance.org domain name. And so effectively the decision consensus from our discussions around this is that all BA tools will have a default registry pointing to the bytecodealliance.org. And the BA steering committee can make the decisions on what they want that to point to and change it in the well known. And so for the time being, that is pointed to GitHub Container Registry. But it could also have a org URL in there or whatever too. And the steering committee could make that decision at some point in the future on how they want to adjust that. But it also gives you the nice properties for other people that want to host their own thing on their own domain, but they want to point to where it's actually running somewhere else. You can do things that way. And the Whackage tool is going to be give you the options to configure different namespaces can point to different registries. So you can be talking to an OCI registry on one namespace and a org registry on all these other ones, or some other configuration around that, or in some local file paths and other pieces. Now we're still trying to figure out like lock files and a whole bunch of other things, but there's also probably going to be some tooling advantages here of like a with depths replacement built into this stuff. So it currently sort of there is a with depths replacement that we haven't advertised or talked about that currently lives in Cargo Component as a subcrate, as a CLI, but I think we'll have a revised version of that in Whackage, either as a subcommand or an auxiliary CLI that works with that. And so we'll probably have some revised doc, guidance on how to use these tools as part of that. But the timeline for all this happening is, I'd say probably is going to come together over the next month. So relatively soon. It's not too far away from kind of working, but there's some more updates that need to happen. So does that kind of make sense to everybody? And one other piece of information. The SIG registries group is having discussions on renaming and rescoping the group to be like something like SIG packaging. So to focus on packaging problems for distributing WebAssembly components instead of just focusing on registry stuff. So it's possible that the award development will still be in scope, most likely, but also, integrating tools for other registry stuff, including OCI, as well as the greater like packaging problem, and maybe even working with providing some tools for programming language ecosystems to better integrate. So that's early discussions. We're still trying to work on the language and the proposal there, and then that would go to the TSC for feedback and approval and that. But that's and hopefully there may be some new interest from other people that might be interested in joining that SIG, given the scope change and the direction. So it's less about like registry design and more about the general packaging problem. Let me know if you guys have any questions about any of that stuff, but.
Calvin, I know you and I talked about some of this yesterday. I guess they're regarding the currently existing PR, I had more thoughts about it since we talked yesterday. Primarily that actually both, so that there's the WIT CLI tool that you were mentioning is in Cargo Component that is like not well known by people. The docs also just introduced the WIT CLI as well as replacing all the docs for WASM Compose with WAC. So I guess there's just like the ways that you would interact with the registry kind of permeate through various workflows. So I don't know. I think I'm just gonna have to like think a bit about how to take the parts that are useful to people that like can exist without reference to wa.dev and distill. I don't know. Interesting. Uh, anyways, but yeah, I like either in a separate PR or a modification to the existing PR. I haven't decided which of those things I'm going to do yet, or what I think makes the most sense. But um, yeah, so that's something to think about.
Kate, you want to jump in?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Danny, to be thinking about the fact that there's stuff in that PR that is new and important, like you were saying, whack plug, and also the discussion around splitting the example from one WIT file to several, which I know we have two PRs in parallel that are trying to do that we need to negotiate between. But I think a separate PR that's specifically oriented around whack plug may be a good idea, and it could be a drag and drop of parts of your current PR and probably a quick review, um, given that it would like replace the WASM tools compose lines.
Cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, I can just open up like a PR that rips those things out of this PR.
Whack is super cool with the plug command, Ryan.
Yeah.
Although when I linked to it and pointed Taylor Thomas to it, he got confused with the sockets terminology and thought it was actually sockets and didn't want to use it. Thought he was limited to WASI sockets, and I thought that was pretty funny. But
He was enthusing about it to me, so he got over that.
Yeah, no, but like when writing the docs, I was just like, oh, you don't have to write WAC files. You just straight up in the CLI refer to things in a registry, and then it just turns them into one giant WASM. It was pretty, yeah, it's very convenient.
the one thing that you had to do two whack plugs though after each other because it couldn't compose properly on the or something or with the
Yeah,
one.
well, no, actually, I ended up looking a bit at the PR that introduced the plug, and there was like some initial conversation about whether it was like ad parity with like some of the things in WASM Compose and whether you could have like a transitive composition or not, which I think is just not in scope for plug. So if you wanted to specify your imports, then that, yeah, would be two plugs.
I see, I see. Oh, okay, so it would have worked if it, I see.
You can have n,
Yeah.
I believe you can have n top level imports, but if you want to specify your imports, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense why it was two commands then.
I guess, yeah, also I started creating documentation on wa.dev. So I think like a lot of the wa.dev specific stuff can move to our own docs. So there's that. Yeah, and then maybe like I think also as I'm doing the like pulling out the things that like immediately are not referencing vendor specific stuff at all, can think about to what extent actually like you like what would it look like if we just took the example components that I published at wa.dev and like had them in GHCR or some kind of thing like that. Is there like a mechanism by which we can still, because even just giving people the ability to like publish something that is then consumable by other people still feels like a also a good thing to strive to tell people that they can do. So
I
also,
don't think we'll be able to immediately document publish flow
yeah,
given these constraints.
yeah.
Because what you could, I don't know what we could say, like, because it's really difficult to talk around that. I mean, you could point them to OCI registry on GitHub, but I don't know if that's like really the thing to do. I would just, I think we may need to not talk about publishing in the component model book until better guidance is issued from the TSC. It is worth noting that we'd love to do a hackathon with any interested people on we were hoping to do with Fermion and Cosmonic and go through like what it looks like for registry usage and all that. Yeah, Kate.
I'll grab a link for it.
I got it. So it is actually currently published to crates, but it's not, I would say, totally usable yet. You have to manually, right now you have to manually find where the config.toml needs to live in your like config directory path, which it's not obvious, and you have to manually edit that file for it to do anything. So obviously there'll be better setup instructions and it will work. But yeah, I would say we can update more on that over this next month.
Probably there's been talk about like a decent amount of things also that are like talked about in some of the CLIs in the existing PR could end up just being whackage like subcommands, which or because yeah, like kind of the whole all the workflows for like using a registry require like using 4 different CLIs for like 4 different things, which is like kind of like okay, maybe people should not have to install so many different things. Then there should be one CLI to rule them all. So maybe whackage ends up being kind of like that. But
yeah, I was thinking about asking the on the call later today on the SIG registry packaging sort of conversation is maybe like whackage should have like cargo like subcommand kind of pattern where you could anything that's like prefixed with cargo dash can operate as like a cargo subcommand or something. So maybe that's like a path for extending whackage subcommands. And Robin Brown has been working on a prototype of something called WOW, which allows you to run just WASM CLIs in using WASM time and kind of like in your workspace with like, so it kind of just wires up that way. And maybe you integrating some of that into whackage might be kind of cool, either as subcommands or something else. That's also potential that we may want to explore. Obviously, whackage needs to also have like feature flags that where you don't want any of this like heavier binaries, etc. And I know Lan was looking at it for some internal use cases at Fermion and needed it to like not talk to a disk and things like that. So there's going to be, a lot of utility, hopefully, that it can be used for a number of different use cases.
I think just like one other thing that I'm thinking about too, just like about like documentation in general. It's like I feel like I've definitely been like thinking about things from this like registry and like I am very much involved in like the registry stir packaging SIG. And so that's like kind of the stuff that I think of that is like that I'm really aware of that like needs more documenting. But if anybody wants to talk about other um places where this group could be of use, but yeah, doesn't need to be like the full focus right now.
Danny, was that a call out to say like cut me off if you don't want to talk about registries more? Like happy to keep discussing.
Uh,
Um, if
Yeah, no, I'm happy to keep talking about registries. I guess I was just like as Calvin was pointing out, like whackage, like, should be getting more robust over like the next month or so. So like depending on like the pace of it, I think I was just thinking about like, I guess just like last session's like meeting or the last meeting was like pretty short. And so I just like am curious if we have like a solid like queue of stuff like to discuss other than this.
I think we, for this specific meeting, don't have other agenda items, but I think that's a fair point of if we know that the whackage development is going to take a few weeks and not be at a place where we can integrate it with the documentation before next meeting, we might not have agenda items for the next meeting as well. So maybe thinking about some of the documentation initiatives we want to be checking up on for the next meeting could be helpful. One thing we've talked about in the past is making sure documentation lives with the tooling and kind of seeing that happen and checking that's happening. So with whackage, like once it feels like it's in a somewhat stable place, like we can kind of throw eyes there to see how documentation is. But we could also spend some time thinking about, since the last couple of meetings, what other tools like WAC now is becoming a little bit more stabilized and like maybe checking in on the documentation there. I personally haven't checked in on it, but seeing if there's things we could add there and from your experience, Danny, of using it for the component book. Did you see any gaps?
The main thing was that I think when I started the PR, I don't think that the whack or that the plug command was existed yet. And so then once I was using the plug command, it made me like not want to document the language. Like I was like, oh, like this should be the thing I actually I was like thinking about like good ways to have if you wanted to have like arbitrary depth compositions possible with the CLI. If you like, I began thinking about like what like command line parsing would like have to look like for that and ways to be like, okay, so like this array of like dependency corresponds to this one. And you'd essentially be like, it gets weird because then you do end up realizing that your command line arguments, I think, would end up looking a lot like a graph, which like is what WAC is a language for describing. So, but yeah. But yeah, I'm hoping that like I'm able to. I'm guessing too. Probably like in the docs that we do for wa.dev, like I'll probably have like my own example, that like or like my own like tutorial kind of a thing that like I make that like really like goes hard for like all the ways that you can use like everything I've like kind of been like thinking about. Um, so I'm hoping that that like really pushes the bounds of like or yeah, leverages whack heavily, so that way we can like get some good things there. But yeah.
It is nice just being able to use this stuff and things feel like they're like spitting different distance to like actually fully working all the way through. So
Yeah, that was the cool thing. Like, I think I can just like send somebody a CLI argument or like a CLI command with whack plug that just like references 3 different like things published to wa.dev, and then the calculator is just like installed on your machine, which is like pretty cool. Like just the calculator CLI, and it like parses and prints things for any arguments. It's just like, okay, this is just actually like super not a challenging thing to use like at all, which feels really cool.
might end up wrapping this meeting 30 minutes, huh?
Yeah, I think we can finish up early and maybe before next meeting, if there's any agenda items, feel free to PR it into the meetings repo, of the Bytecode Alliance. And I think what I'm gonna do is look through Zulip and kind of scan what kind of questions people have been having and see if there's like a documentation gaps that way. But yeah, just kind of seeing if we have like wazi.dev, we have the component book, like where are we seeing gaps besides those places would be nice to kind of vet. Awesome. Well, I will see y'all in a few weeks. Bye, everyone.